These are the faces of South Africa's political killers of the apartheid era. Should they have been forgiven without confessing and given indemnity from prosecution? Should they have been charged in criminal courts or war crime tribunals? This was the question facing the political leaders who were negotiating a political deal which led to the democratic elections of April 1994. There was strong pressure from the liberation movements for criminal trials such as those at Nuremberg, where German Nazi war criminals were tried after World War II. This was not a viable option in South Africa because the security forces of the apartheid government would not have accepted a transition to democracy if it meant they would have had to go to jail.
The problem we face in this country is that there's an obvious tension between reparation and reconciliation, between retribution and reconciliation. I mean, at the moral level, the answer is absolutely clear, and that is they should all be put on trial and they should pay for the crimes that they committed. But I'm afraid, looking at the kind of vision of the unfolding of the negotiating process, is not as simple as that. And this is one of the issues which in other countries as well, whether it's Chile or other places, become an element in the bargain, in a way, which has to be struck in an atmosphere of give and take.
That negotiated settlement, which was our miracle, would not have happened without the very key, critical element of amnesty.
The negotiators thus chose the amnesty route, not an unqualified or blanket amnesty, but amnesty subjected to very specific preconditions. This route was taken to promote the process of reconciliation, which was so crucial in the transition to democracy, but also because people applying for amnesty could reveal the real story of many political crimes which would otherwise have remained unsolved. In the end, a substantial amount of the truth about our past, revealed by the Truth Commission, came from men who applied for amnesty for their crimes.
Only in South Africa have they offered an amnesty in a way where they require something in return, where they, of course, require the full truth and limit as to who or what kinds of crimes that amnesty would be given to. Certainly, that's a better model than having a blanket amnesty where it applies to everybody and you get nothing in return, so you're not even quite sure what you're amnestying for.
The Truth Commission Act determined that 3 preconditions had to be met before amnesty could be granted. Applicants had to make a full and truthful disclosure of events and actions around the act for which amnesty was applied. The applicant had to prove he had a political motive, and the actions could not be out of proportion with the political objective. The amnesty committees consisted of judges, advocates and attorneys, with a judge always sitting as chairperson. Unlike the hearings of the Human Rights Violations Committee, witnesses, victims, survivors and applicants were entitled to legal representation, and all evidence was tested through cross-examination. A crack squad of Pretoria-based security policemen applied for amnesty for a number of killings of ANC and UDF activists. Paul van Vuren was one of them. Here he describes the murders of Jackson Make and Andrew Makupe to the Amnesty Committee.
One was connected to his foot and one was connected to his hand. Then when you switch the generator on, it shocks the person and his body goes rigid. During the interrogation, it became clear that his contact in Mamelodi was a certain Andrew Makupe. We put Makupe in our minibus, and one of us followed with the Colt Galant. I believe this was Sergeant Mamasela. We left Maki and Makupe at the property about 5 kilometers north of the Pinnisrivier Dam. At dawn, Hector, Mamasela and myself returned to the property. We interrogated Makupe in the same way as we interrogated Maki. That means we also gave him electrical shocks with the generator. I received information from him that he was responsible for the transport of arms and that he received his instructions from Harold Sefola. That night, Mamsela, myself and Hector went to Witbank. We used 2 vehicles. Hector and myself waited outside Witbank. After about 2 hours, he returned with Sefola. We returned to the property to the north of the Pinaars River. We also interrogated Sefola in a similar manner as the others. Masele forced a knife in Sefola's nose, after which he provided additional information. He also begged for his life. Mamsela and myself untied him. He asked if he could say something. I agreed to it. He asked if he could sing Kosisikilele Africa, and he said that we had better kill him. He also claimed that the ANC would govern later, that apartheid would no longer be able to be maintained, and that democracy would be the end of the Boers. Mamsele had an ANC flag present, which was with us then. He threw this over Marke while Sefola sang Kosisikilele Africa. We then shocked Makupe to death.
He must come to my house. Van Vuren must come to my house and sit down and say, Mrs. Makupe, I've done wrong. Maybe we'll talk, and then miracles will happen.
A lot of harm was done.
Most of the victims or family of victims mentioned in the amnesty applications declared that the process had helped them.
Justice to me would certainly not be justice to Klerok as a whole, okay? But I would like the people who have killed them to come forward so that people could know them. An eye for an eye wouldn't do anyone any good, okay? But at least honesty would be one form of justice, honesty.
My name is Bongani Made. I'm staying at the castle. I truly respect your feelings and I do apologize for what happened. It's not that I've done that because I hate white people.
The Truth Commission Act did not demand that the perpetrator express remorse for the deed for which he applied for amnesty.
Your apology for the killing of Mr. Hani.
Mr. Chairman, with respect, may I ask, is this a condition, and is this something over which the committee should then be subjected to evidence? My impression was that an apology was not necessary and not part of the whole function of this committee.
I'm not asking this a question of law. I am asking as to whether this person that is before you has ever expressed regret for killing a person who could have made a valuable contribution to the political life of this country or not?
Mr. Chairman, no. How can I ever apologize for an act of war? War is war. I haven't heard the ANC apologizing, the perpetrators of these deeds apologizing for killing people in pubs and blowing them up in wimpy bars. I've heard no apologies for that, Mr. Chairman. Those people are just as important as Mr. Hani was.
It's a strange dynamic, and as I speak internationally about this, that's always a surprise if you state that simple fact, that remorse is not required and someone can feel no remorse and get amnesty. However, I agree with those persons here who have explained, and I think it's right that you can't require that. It doesn't make sense, and if you required it, then of course people would say they were sorry, and you would never know how honest of a dynamic that was.
If you put a gun to somebody's head and they repent, you have two problems. The first is you have no way of knowing if this is true, right? And I would rather have somebody who does not repent and says so, than somebody who lies saying they repent in order to gain amnesty. Because then you begin to bring deceptions into it from the very start. It's very, very dangerous.
We don't take into account, for example, whether a man says, I'm sorry for what I did. You know, a man may come and say, I'm sorry for what I did, and there may be very little else he might be able to say to justify his offense. Well, that admission that he is sorry and is apologetic may well be the kind of thing that he'd do if he appeared before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But before the Amnesty Committee, we would like to know what his acts were, what were the political objectives, how were his acts related to a political objective. And if we think that this is the kind, that it meets the requirements of the Act, then we treat it and will give a decision in the matter.
But most amnesty applicants did express remorse and ask forgiveness. To many of them, being forgiven by the victims or families of victims was very important so they could find peace and closure themselves. To many victims or survivors, facing the perpetrator was a big part of their healing, whether they could forgive or not.
In South Africa, it's no doubt it's got the conflict between the oppressed people and oppressed. Now that decision, that thing now, that war, I think is over. Thank
you. Forgiveness does not come cheaply. It's something that comes deeply from the heart. And I can just ask the people that were involved directly or indirectly and who have been affected by this case to consider forgiving me.
My brother was butchered like a beast in a butchery, you know, for doing nothing. An innocent victim. So you can just imagine. I mean, the word forgiveness, in as far as Tekutse is concerned, does not exist in our dictionary.
I don't expect the Mngenge family to forgive me, because I don't know how I ever in my life would be able to forgive a man like Tekutse.
We're determined to haunt him until the day he dies, because even if he does get that indemnity, this memory will haunt him until he dies.
Some victims and survivors believed the amnesty process wasn't justice, wasn't enough.
Is enough, would enough be that if you murdered somebody, I would be satisfied if you were executed? Is that enough? Will it be enough that you are incarcerated for 10, 15, 20, 30 years? Enough, enough. What do you mean enough? An eye for an eye? Is that what would satisfy? I don't know. The thing is, I certainly know of a few for whom to have come clean has cost them their marriages. Now, is that enough? And some, maybe not, I don't know. The anguish of it. Do we know? I mean, have we got a calculus to compute? Does it, the pain that someone, the remorse that they get, they not being able to sleep, is it enough? Enough for whom? Enough what? You see, I would say that people don't go off scot-free. Because in a way, what we have come to seem to accept is that the judicial system that we are talking about is not retributive justice. It is restorative justice. We're trying to see how are you going to be able to do something that will redress the balance, that is going to advance healing, not just for the survivors or the victims, but for the perpetrator as well.
Kuntu